The loneliest souls are sometimes the ones the moon refuses to forget. For 7 long years, the wolves of Ash Hollow whispered about a small cabin hidden beneath the towering pines where silver moonlight lingered even after dawn. Hunters avoided the narrow trail that wound through the forest. Travelers lowered their voices whenever they passed the old stone bridge leading toward the quiet valley. Some claimed the woman who lived there carried an ancient curse. Others insisted she had been abandoned by the moon goddess herself. None of them truly knew Evelyn Carter. They only remembered the frightened Omega who had once stood before her pack while every familiar face turned away. Time had erased the details of that painful night, but it had never erased the silence that followed. Evelyn had learned to build a peaceful life from everything she had lost. Every morning before sunrise, she gathered fresh water from the creek, tended a modest garden beside her weathered cabin, and cared for injured birds, frightened rabbits, and wandering deer that somehow trusted her without hesitation. The forest never judged her. It accepted every gentle touch, every quiet word, every patient smile she offered. Seasons drifted past like slow-moving clouds. Spring covered the hills with wildflowers. Summer filled the air with birdsong. Autumn painted the trees in gold and crimson. Winter wrapped the valley in sparkling snow. Through every changing season, Evelyn remained exactly where the world had left her, never asking for more than another peaceful sunrise beneath the moon she still loved despite everything. On clear evenings, she often sat on the old wooden porch with a warm cup of herbal tea, watching silver light spill across the meadow while memories faded into the soft chorus of crickets and distant owls. She no longer dreamed of returning to any pack. She no longer imagined someone coming to claim the place beside her. Hope had become something quiet instead of something painful. Yet the valley itself seemed to guard her secret. Wolves never crossed the invisible edge surrounding her home. Even the strongest predators paused at the tree line before turning away without a sound. It was as though the forest itself recognized something hidden inside the forgotten Omega that no one else could see. Hundreds of miles away, inside the towering halls of Blackthorn Castle, Alpha King Lucian Blackthorn awoke from the same mysterious dream for the 12th night in a row. He never saw a battlefield. He never saw a throne. Instead, he saw moonlight falling across a lonely cabin surrounded by whispering pines. A woman stood quietly on the porch with her back turned toward him, her long golden brown hair glowing beneath the silver sky as though the moon itself refused to leave her side. Every time he reached for her, the dream vanished before he could see her face. The royal advisors dismissed it as exhaustion. The palace scholars blamed forgotten legends. But deep inside, Lucian felt something older than reason calling him farther into the northern wilderness than any king had traveled in generations. And on that very night, while Evelyn quietly closed her cabin door against the cool mountain breeze, dozens of royal banners appeared beyond the distant ridge, moving silently beneath the rising moon toward the one place every wolf had spent 7 years avoiding. Evelyn had long ago stopped counting the number of full moons that had risen above the valley because every one of them looked exactly the same from her front porch, peaceful, distant, and quietly faithful. While the rest of the northern territories celebrated festivals, gathered around roaring fires, and welcomed new families into their packs, her days followed a rhythm that belonged only to the forest. At first light she collected fresh herbs growing beside the creek, knowing which leaves soothed fever, which flowers eased restless sleep, and which roots could strengthen a tired traveler after a long journey. By mid-morning she carried a woven basket through the woods, leaving small bundles of medicine near forgotten cabins where elderly villagers lived alone. Most never saw who delivered them. Some believed the gifts came from wandering spirits. Evelyn never corrected them because kindness did not need recognition to matter. The children from a nearby farming settlement secretly called her the Moon Lady after discovering tiny wooden animals carved by hand waiting beside the old bridge every autumn. Their parents warned them not to wander into the valley, yet every winter someone always found neatly stacked firewood outside an aging neighbor's door after the first heavy snowfall. No one connected those quiet acts to the woman beneath the pines because they had spent too many years believing the stories instead of searching for the truth. Evelyn preferred it that way. Solitude no longer felt like punishment. It had become a place where her heart could finally breathe without fear of judgment. Even the creatures of the forest seemed to understand her gentle spirit. Songbirds landed on the porch railing while she worked. Foxes rested near the edge of her garden without alarm. Injured animals somehow found their way to her cabin as though guided by an invisible promise that they would be safe. There were evenings when soft silver light shimmered across the meadow, and every living thing around her became strangely calm. Evelyn noticed the peaceful silence but never questioned it. She assumed every valley beneath the moon looked that beautiful. Far beyond the mountains, however, the royal procession continued its steady march north. Alpha King Lucian Blackthorn rode at the front with quiet determination, ignoring repeated requests from his advisors to delay the journey until daylight. Each mile only strengthened the strange certainty growing inside him. The dream had never shown him a face, yet every winding forest trail felt strangely familiar, as though memories not entirely his own were leading him forward. His captain eventually rode beside him and spoke carefully. "Your Majesty, the maps show nothing beyond these ridges except abandoned hunting paths." Lucian kept his eyes fixed on the moonlit horizon. "Then perhaps the maps have forgotten what the moon still remembers." Those words settled over the company like an unanswered question. As midnight approached, a cool breeze drifted through Evelyn's open window carrying an unfamiliar scent, crisp pine mixed with iron, cedar, and distant rain. She looked toward the dark tree line where dozens of tiny lights slowly appeared between the towering trunks. They did not flicker like wandering lanterns carried by ordinary travelers. They moved together with calm precision, growing closer with every passing heartbeat until the quiet valley that had protected her for 7 peaceful years prepared to welcome visitors it had never expected. The lights continued drifting through the forest until they stopped at the edge of the meadow as though an invisible boundary refused to let them advance another step. The royal horses, fearless companions that had crossed frozen rivers and steep mountain passes without hesitation, suddenly lowered their heads and refused to take another stride. The soldiers exchanged uncertain glances. Even the restless wind faded into complete silence. Lucian slowly dismounted, his polished black armor reflecting ribbons of moonlight beneath the ancient pine branches. His crimson royal cloak settled behind him as he studied the quiet cabin standing alone in the valley. Nothing about the place appeared extraordinary. A small vegetable garden rested beside a stone path. Bundles of freshly gathered herbs hung beneath the porch roof. Warm light spilled softly from a single window. It looked less like the home of a cursed woman and more like the home of someone who had spent years creating peace from loneliness. One of the older guards stepped closer and lowered his voice. "Your Majesty, the stories say no wolf remains here after sunset." Lucian continued watching the cabin without blinking. Stories often grow louder where truth has been forgotten. Before anyone could answer, the front door opened with a gentle creak. Evelyn stepped onto the porch carrying a lantern whose golden glow mixed with the silver moonlight around her. She had expected strangers, but she had not expected an entire royal procession. For a brief moment she simply stood there, her long golden brown hair moving softly in the evening breeze while her pale blue-gray dress swayed around her ankles. Her expression held caution but not fear. She had spent too many years living alone to panic at unexpected visitors. Instead she quietly searched each unfamiliar face until her eyes met Lucian's across the meadow. Neither of them spoke. Neither of them moved. Something impossible settled over the valley. The anxious horses relaxed. The nervous birds hidden among the branches began singing again despite the late hour. Even the distant stream seemed louder than before. Lucian felt the same strange calm that had visited him only in dreams, a peaceful certainty unlike anything he had experienced inside crowded castles or grand ceremonial halls. Evelyn could not explain why the tall stranger dressed in royal black felt strangely familiar, as though she had once known him in a memory that no longer belonged to her. She broke the silence first with quiet kindness instead of suspicion. "You have traveled a long way. Your horses look tired. There is fresh water beside the barn if they need it." The captain looked at his king in surprise. No one greeted the Alpha King as though he were an ordinary traveler. Yet Lucian smiled almost imperceptibly, the first genuine smile his closest advisors had witnessed in months. "Thank you," he answered gently. "That is more generosity than we expected to find tonight." Evelyn nodded politely without recognizing the weight carried by the royal crest upon his chest. To her he was simply another weary traveler standing beneath the same moon she had watched for 7 years. Somewhere deep within the surrounding forest, hidden beneath roots older than any kingdom, faint silver light awakened beneath the earth for the first time in generations, responding not to a crown, but to the quiet meeting of two souls whose paths had finally crossed. For several quiet seconds neither of them spoke, and somehow the silence felt more honest than any formal greeting. Lucian had stood before countless nobles, foreign rulers, and proud alpha leaders, yet none of those encounters had unsettled him the way one calm woman standing barefoot on a weathered wooden porch did. There was no fear in Evelyn's eyes, no admiration for the royal crest upon his armor because she had not even noticed it. She simply saw a traveler who looked exhausted after a long journey. She lifted the lantern slightly and offered a gentle smile that had become rare. "After years of living alone, the night air will grow colder before dawn. If you wish to rest for a little while, there is fresh bread and warm soup inside. It is simple, but you are welcome to share it." The royal captain looked at Lucian with quiet concern, expecting the king to decline immediately. Royal custom demanded caution in unfamiliar places. Instead, Lucian surprised everyone by removing his heavy leather gloves and handing them to one of his guards. "We will not stay long," he said softly, "but I would be grateful for your kindness." Evelyn stepped aside without ceremony, allowing him to enter the modest cabin. The room reflected the same peaceful order she had built around her life. Shelves filled with carefully labeled jars of herbs lined one wall. Fresh flowers rested inside a clay vase near the window. A stone fireplace filled the room with gentle warmth while a small wooden table held 2 handmade bowls and a loaf of bread that had only recently finished baking. Nothing inside suggested wealth, yet everything spoke of quiet care. Lucian slowly looked around, noticing details that most people would overlook. A child's wooden bird carefully repaired instead of replaced. Blankets neatly folded beside the fireplace for unexpected guests. Tiny carved moons decorating the windowsill. Every object carried signs of patient hands and generous intentions. Evelyn poured warm soup into 2 bowls before setting one in front of him. "I am afraid I do not often receive visitors," she admitted with a small laugh. "The forest usually keeps people away." Lucian accepted the bowl and found himself asking the question that had followed him through every dream. "Does the loneliness ever become too heavy to carry?" Evelyn paused for a moment before answering honestly. "At first it did. Then I realized loneliness and peace are not always the same thing. Once I stopped waiting for people who never came back, I began noticing everything that had stayed." She glanced toward the window where a small owl rested quietly upon the fence. "The birds stayed. The trees stayed. The moon stayed. Eventually my heart learned to stay too." Her words settled deeply inside Lucian. For years he had ruled an entire kingdom surrounded by thousands of voices, yet genuine peace had remained beyond his reach. Here, inside a tiny cabin hidden beneath ancient pines, he felt lighter than he had inside the grand halls of Blackthorn Castle. Neither of them noticed the faint silver glow beginning to shimmer beneath the floorboards, spreading through the roots of the ancient trees surrounding the valley. Outside, the royal guards watched in stunned silence as flowers that only bloomed beneath a full moon slowly opened one after another across the meadow, even though the season for their blossoms had passed many weeks before. Evelyn noticed the flowers only after she carried the empty bowls toward the small kitchen table. The delicate white blossoms covered the meadow outside her window like scattered stars, their petals shimmering beneath the moon although they had not bloomed at this time of year since she first arrived in the valley. She quietly frowned, trying to remember whether she had ever seen anything like it before. Lucian followed her gaze and felt the same quiet pull that had led him across mountains and rivers. Every instinct told him that nothing unfolding around the cabin was ordinary. One of the royal scholars stepped carefully onto the porch, hesitant to interrupt. "Your Majesty, forgive me, but there is something you should see." Lucian excused himself with a polite nod, and Evelyn watched as the visitors gathered near the edge of the meadow. Curious but respectful, she remained by the doorway. The elderly scholar slowly knelt beside one of the glowing flowers before brushing away the soft grass surrounding its stem. Hidden beneath the moonlit blossoms was an ancient stone carved with a faded symbol almost erased by centuries of wind and rain. The old man's eyes widened with disbelief. "I have only seen this mark in forgotten royal records. It belonged to the first moon sanctuary, a place believed to have disappeared generations ago." Lucian looked from the stone toward Evelyn's peaceful cabin. "Are you certain?" The scholar nodded slowly. The sanctuary was said to awaken only when its true guardian returned. Every map placed it somewhere beyond the northern forests, but no expedition ever found it. "We believed it was only a legend." Evelyn stepped closer, surprised by the conversation. "I found that stone while planting herbs years ago. I thought it was nothing more than an old marker. There are several others beneath the trees. No one ever seemed interested in them." The scholar exchanged a silent glance with the captain before lowering his voice. "Your Majesty, this valley may have been hidden for a reason." Lucian turned toward Evelyn again, studying her with growing curiosity rather than suspicion. "During the years you have lived here, have you ever noticed unusual things happening when the moon is full?" Evelyn hesitated. She had always dismissed the strange moments as tricks of memory. Sometimes the forest grows unusually quiet. Injured animals recover more quickly than expected. Flowers bloom earlier than they should. I never believed those things meant anything. They simply felt normal here. As she spoke, a gentle breeze drifted across the meadow, carrying the sweet fragrance of the newly opened blossoms. Every lantern carried by the royal guards flickered once before burning brighter without anyone touching them. Even the weary horses appeared completely rested, lifting their heads peacefully as though the long journey had never happened. The scholar quietly whispered, "The sanctuary is responding to her presence." Lucian remained silent, but a question that had haunted him for years finally formed with perfect clarity. He had not traveled into the wilderness searching for forgotten ruins or ancient legends. Somehow, without realizing it, every road had been leading him to the quiet woman who still believed she was nothing more than an ordinary Omega living alone beneath the moon, while deep beneath the roots of the ancient valley, something timeless continued awakening one gentle heartbeat at a time. Evelyn struggled to understand why everyone suddenly looked at her as though she had become part of an ancient story she had never heard before. The valley had always been home, nothing more. She had planted every herb with her own hands, repaired every loose board on the cabin, and watched every season pass from the same front porch. If hidden history truly rested beneath the meadow, it had remained silent through every lonely winter she had endured. Lucian sensed the uncertainty in her expression and gently stepped closer without allowing the growing excitement among his advisors to overwhelm her. "You do not have to understand everything tonight," he said quietly. "Sometimes answers arrive long after they are needed." Evelyn offered a faint smile, grateful that his voice carried neither pressure nor expectation. Before she could respond, one of the royal scouts hurried from the forest with controlled urgency. He bowed respectfully before the king. "Your Majesty, riders have entered the southern trail. Their banners belong to Ash Hollow Pack." The peaceful atmosphere shifted almost imperceptibly. Evelyn's fingers tightened around the warm lantern handle. She had not heard that name spoken aloud in years. Memories she had carefully buried beneath quiet routines returned like distant echoes. Faces that had once turned away. Doors that had quietly closed. Words that had convinced her she no longer belonged anywhere except this forgotten valley. Lucian noticed the change immediately. Her calm breathing became slightly uneven, and the gentle confidence that had filled the cabin moments earlier gave way to old uncertainty. "Who are they to you?" he asked softly. Evelyn lowered her eyes for only a moment before answering with quiet honesty. "They were my pack once. I have not seen any of them since the day I left." The captain instinctively stepped nearer to the king, awaiting orders, but Lucian simply raised one calm hand. "We will greet them peacefully. No one will disturb this home." Minutes later a small delegation emerged between the towering pines. At their front rode pack elder Marcus Hale, his silver hair touched by age but his sharp eyes immediately widening as he recognized the royal standards surrounding the cabin. His surprise quickly shifted into careful diplomacy. "Your Majesty, we did not realize you were here. We came searching for the woman who lives in this valley." Evelyn remained still beside the porch. Marcus looked toward her with an expression she could not easily read. It was neither warmth nor open hostility, only uneasy calculation. "We recently learned she has been living here alone," he continued. "Ash Hollow wishes to invite her home." The words sounded strange after 7 silent years. Home. Evelyn almost smiled at how unfamiliar that single word had become. Lucian studied the elder carefully. 7 years passed without an invitation. Why now? Marcus hesitated before answering. There are old matters that deserve correction. Lucian had spent enough years judging truth from carefully chosen words to recognize what remained unsaid. Whatever had brought Ash Hollow into the valley tonight was not simple regret. Something had changed, and somehow it was connected to the awakening sanctuary hidden beneath Evelyn's peaceful home. As the full moon climbed higher above the ancient pines, the glowing flowers continued opening one after another across the meadow, while every person standing there slowly realized that the forgotten Omega they had once overlooked had become the center of a mystery far older than any living pack could remember. No one moved for several long moments because the valley itself seemed to be waiting. The moon climbed higher above the ancient pines, bathing the meadow in silver light until every glowing flower reflected the sky like tiny stars scattered across the earth. Evelyn stepped away from the porch, drawn by a quiet feeling she could not explain. She walked slowly across the grass, her eyes fixed on the old stone the royal scholar had uncovered. With every step she took, another circle of blossoms quietly opened around her feet. Gasps spread through both the royal guards and the visitors from Ash Hollow, not from fear, but from astonishment. The elderly scholar removed an aged parchment from his satchel and compared the faded illustration to the glowing symbols emerging across the meadow. His hands trembled. It is exactly as the oldest chronicles described. The sanctuary awakens only when the keeper returns beneath the full moon with the rightful king standing as witness. Evelyn looked back in confusion. Keeper. The word meant nothing to her. I have never guarded anything except this little home. The scholar smiled gently. Sometimes people protect the greatest treasures without ever realizing it. Lucian quietly joined her beside the ancient stone. He noticed that the restless uncertainty she had carried since the arrival of her former pack had begun to fade again. Somehow the valley accepted her completely, as naturally as the forest accepted rain. Before anyone could speak again, a soft silver glow appeared beneath Evelyn's feet. Thin lines of light spread through the grass, connecting every ancient marker hidden beneath the meadow until a beautiful pattern surrounded the cabin. The air became wonderfully still. Birds resting in nearby branches remained peacefully silent. Deer slowly emerged from the forest without fear, standing together beneath the trees as though answering an invisible invitation. Evelyn instinctively reached toward the glowing stone to steady herself. The moment her fingertips brushed its cool surface, the carved symbol awakened with gentle radiance instead of force. Warm light drifted upward like moonlit mist, wrapping softly around the valley before settling upon the flowers, the trees, and finally the cabin itself. Lucian felt an unexpected warmth spread through his chest, replacing years of quiet restlessness that no victory or royal celebration had ever eased. He looked at Evelyn, and for the first time since becoming king, the endless search inside his heart simply stopped. Nothing dramatic was spoken between them. There was only a quiet certainty that neither could explain. Evelyn slowly turned toward him, surprised to find that standing beside him felt strangely familiar, as though some forgotten memory had finally found its way home. Around them the ancient light continued to shimmer peacefully. The old scholar lowered his head with deep respect. The sanctuary has made its choice. It did not awaken for power. It awakened for harmony. Elder Marcus Hale watched everything unfold with growing regret. 7 years earlier he had accepted the judgment of others instead of listening to the quiet young Omega who had never wished harm upon anyone. Now the valley itself honored the woman his pack had forgotten. Lucian gently met Evelyn's eyes and spoke with calm sincerity rather than royal authority. Whatever this place is becoming, you will not face it alone. Evelyn felt the old fear inside her finally loosen its hold. For the first time in many years, the future no longer looked like an empty road disappearing into darkness. Beneath the full moon, surrounded by living light and ancient promises, hope quietly returned to the lonely valley where it had been waiting all along. Elder Marcus Hale slowly removed the ceremonial medallion from around his neck, the symbol he had carried as the senior representative of Ash Hollow for nearly 3 decades. Without speaking, he stepped into the moonlit meadow and lowered himself onto one knee before Evelyn. Every member of his delegation followed his example until the entire group stood in respectful silence with their heads bowed. No order had been given. No royal command had forced the moment. It came from the unmistakable realization that they had misunderstood the quiet young woman they once believed had nothing to offer. Evelyn looked at the familiar faces and saw people who had once shaped her earliest memories. She remembered gathering herbs with the elderly healers, laughing with children beneath summer trees, and believing she would spend her entire life among them. Those memories no longer carried bitterness. They simply belonged to another chapter that had quietly ended long ago. Marcus finally raised his eyes, his voice heavy with sincere regret. We searched for strength in loud voices, impressive titles, and proud appearances. We never recognized the quiet strength that stood beside us every day. We judged what we could easily see and ignored what truly mattered. For that failure, I ask your forgiveness, not because we deserve it, but because you have always possessed a kinder heart than we did. Evelyn remained silent for a long moment. The younger version of herself might have waited years to hear those words. Now they no longer carried the power they once held. She gently stepped forward until she stood before the elderly leader. I left this valley believing I had lost everything, she said softly. Instead, I found peace. If I hold on to old sorrow, then I lose that peace again. I do not wish to carry yesterday any longer. Marcus lowered his head with visible relief, and quiet emotion spread across the faces of those who had accompanied him. Lucian watched the exchange without interruption. He understood that true justice was not always found in punishment. Sometimes it appeared when someone who had every reason to become bitter chose compassion instead. The royal scholar smiled quietly as another gentle wave of silver light drifted through the meadow. The sanctuary is responding once again, he whispered. It reflects the heart of its keeper. Where kindness remains, its light grows stronger. The glowing flowers shimmered more brightly than before, stretching across the valley until the entire hillside resembled a sky filled with stars. Even the oldest trees seemed to stand taller beneath the gentle radiance. Lucian stepped beside Evelyn, his presence steady and reassuring. The kingdom has forgotten many places over the centuries, he said. That will change. This valley will be protected. No one will disturb the sanctuary or the life you have built here. Evelyn looked around the peaceful meadow, the little cabin, the garden she had planted with patient hands, and the forest that had quietly become her family. For the first time, she realized she no longer had to protect it alone. The burden she had never spoken aloud quietly slipped away. As dawn slowly approached beyond the eastern mountains, golden light began mixing with the fading silver glow of the moon, and everyone standing in the valley understood they had witnessed something far greater than the rediscovery of an ancient sanctuary. They had witnessed the quiet triumph of a gentle soul whose greatest strength had never been power at all, but the unwavering choice to remain kind even after the world had forgotten her. Several months passed, and the little valley changed without ever losing the quiet spirit that had made it feel like home. The ancient sanctuary no longer hid beneath forgotten stones. Its winding paths were gently restored, its weathered markers carefully preserved, and its peaceful gardens flourished under Evelyn's patient care. Yet the cabin remained exactly where it had always stood. Lucian had offered to build a grand residence worthy of the kingdom's highest honor, but Evelyn had smiled and declined. She told him that the small porch where she had learned to believe in tomorrow again was more valuable than walls of polished stone. Lucian understood immediately. Some places were not important because they were magnificent. They were important because they had sheltered hope when nothing else remained. He often returned to the valley without ceremony, setting aside his royal cloak before helping repair fences, gather herbs, or carry fresh water from the creek. The soldiers who accompanied him quickly discovered that their king smiled more often beneath the towering pines than he ever had inside the castle. Word of the sanctuary slowly spread throughout the northern territories, not as a place of miracles, but as a place where people remembered what kindness could accomplish. Families traveled for days simply to walk the quiet trails beneath the moonlit trees. Children laughed freely through the meadows, elders rested on handcrafted benches overlooking the stream, and weary travelers always found a warm meal waiting inside the familiar cabin. Evelyn welcomed each visitor with the same gentle grace she had offered long before anyone knew her name. Nothing about her heart had changed because the world had finally recognized her worth. Elder Marcus returned often, not as a leader carrying authority, but as a grateful friend carrying seeds for the garden or books rescued from forgotten libraries. Every visit reminded him that forgiveness was one of the greatest gifts anyone could receive, but never demand. The sanctuary itself continued to bloom with quiet beauty. Moonflowers opened each full moon, silver light danced softly across the ancient stones, and the peaceful warmth surrounding the valley became a symbol of harmony throughout the kingdom. The royal scholars eventually completed their research and concluded that the sanctuary had never belonged to a single bloodline. It awakened wherever compassion endured, and it had chosen Evelyn because she had protected life, hope, and peace without expecting recognition. One clear evening, as another full moon rose above the pines, Lucian and Evelyn stood together on the familiar porch where strangers had first become companions. Neither spoke for a long while. The gentle sound of the creek, the whispering trees, and the distant calls of night birds filled the comfortable silence between them. Finally, Lucian looked toward the valley that had quietly transformed both of their lives. "I spent years searching for something I could never name," he said softly. "I believed it was hidden somewhere beyond the horizon. Instead, it was waiting in the heart of someone who had never stopped choosing kindness." Evelyn smiled, watching moonlight settle across the meadow where glowing flowers swayed gently in the evening breeze. "Sometimes the greatest journeys do not lead us to new places," she answered. "Sometimes they lead us back to the kind of person we were always meant to become." Above them, the full moon shone peacefully over the little cabin beneath the pines, and for the first time in many years, the valley no longer felt like a place where someone had been forgotten. It had become a place where hope, compassion, and quiet courage had finally found their way home.